There are moments when the past stops being memory and becomes evidence. For Lucille Ball, that moment came in a manila envelope delivered by two men in dark suits who didn't smile, didn't sit down, and didn't leave until she understood that everything she'd built could disappear because of a signature she'd made 17 years ago when her grandfather asked her to do him a favor. The card said Communist Party USA. The year was 1953, and America was hunting ghosts, and Lucille Ball had just become prey. September 4th, 1953. Desilu Productions, General Service Studios. The FBI agents arrived at 9:47 a.m. Lucille was in her dressing room, mid-costume change between scenes, wearing Lucy Ricardo's polka dot house dress, but not yet the wig, her own dark auburn hair pinned flat against her skull with bobby pins that pressed small indents into her scalp. She could feel each one, tiny points of pressure that would leave marks she'd have to powder over later. The knock was professional. 2 knuckles. Firm. Not aggressive, but not asking permission either. "Miss Ball, FBI. We need to speak with you." She looked at herself in the mirror. The bulbs around the frame were all lit, 12 of them humming faintly with that electrical buzz that never quite disappeared. The light was flat and unforgiving. She could see every line around her eyes, every place where the makeup didn't quite blend into her jawline, the faint shadow of exhaustion that lived beneath her cheekbones, no matter how much sleep she got. She was 42 years old. She owned half of the most successful production company in television. Her show, I Love Lucy, was watched by more people every Monday night than attended church on Sunday. And 2 FBI agents were standing outside her dressing room door. She opened it. They were young, both of them, mid-30s maybe, clean-shaven, haircut military short, wearing suits the color of wet concrete. The one on the left held a briefcase. The one on the right held a manila folder with her name typed on a white label. Ball. Lucille Desiree. Seeing her full name like that, official, documented, reduced to a label on government paperwork, made something cold settle in her stomach. "Miss Ball," the one with the folder said, "I'm Agent Miller. This is Agent Forsyth. We need to ask you some questions about your political affiliations." She didn't invite them in. She stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, her body blocking entry. "What kind of questions?" she said. Her voice came out steady, not friendly, not hostile, just present. Miller opened the folder. Inside, a photocopy of a voter registration card, yellow with age. The paper looked brittle even in reproduction, the typewritten text slightly blurred where the carbon copy hadn't pressed hard enough. But the signature at the bottom was clear. Lucille Ball, date 1936, party affiliation, communist. She stared at it. The dressing room suddenly felt smaller. The air tasted stale, recycled through the building's ventilation system too many times, carrying the ghost of this morning's coffee and yesterday's cigarette smoke and the faint chemical tang of hairspray. "Do you recognize this document?" Miller asked. Lucille looked up. "Where did you get that?" "We're asking the questions, Miss Ball." She took a breath. 17 years ago. She'd been 25 years old, living with her grandfather Fred in a cramped apartment off Highland Avenue, working contract jobs at RKO, doing bit parts in B-movies, auditioning for roles she never got, coming home exhausted and broke, and trying to figure out if she'd ever be more than a pretty face in the back of a chorus line. Fred had been political. Not dangerously so. Not in the way that meant meetings in basements or manifestos printed on cheap paper. Just invested. He read the papers. He listened to union organizers on street corners. He believed workers deserved better. And one day he'd asked her, "Lucy, will you do me a favor? Register communist. Just to make me happy." She'd been tired. She'd said yes. She'd filled out the card, signed it, handed it back. She'd never gone to a meeting, never read Marx, never did anything except make an old man happy for an afternoon. And now 2 FBI agents were standing in her dressing room holding that card like it was a murder weapon. "I registered," she said slowly, "because my grandfather asked me to. In 1936, I was 25. I never attended a single meeting. That's not what we're here to determine," Miller interrupted. "We're here to inform you that this information has been flagged and that it may become public." The cold in her stomach turned to ice. "Public," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am?" "Meaning what?" Miller and Forsyth exchanged a glance. "Meaning," Forsyth said, his voice softer than Miller's but no less final, that there are people asking questions about communists in Hollywood, and your name is on a list. Later that morning, Desilu executive offices, Desilu was pacing. He'd been pacing for 20 minutes, ever since Lucille had walked into his office and set the photocopy of the registration card on his desk without saying a word. The office smelled like cigar smoke, and the leather of the chairs and the faint sweetness of the rum Desi kept in a crystal decanter on the sideboard. He wasn't drinking now, it was barely noon, but his hand kept moving toward the bottle, and then stopping, as though he couldn't decide whether this situation required liquor or clarity. Lucille sat in one of the chairs, hands folded in her lap. Still, too still, the way she got when she was trying not to scream. "This is ridiculous," Desilu said. He gestured at the card with the hand holding his unlit cigar, ash flaking onto the carpet. "You were 25. Your grandfather asked you? You didn't do anything." "It doesn't matter what I did," Lucille said quietly. "It matters what's on paper. Then we explain. We tell them." "Tell them what, Desi?" She looked up at him. "That I signed a Communist Party registration card? That's all they need. The rest doesn't matter." Desilu stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw something in his face she almost never saw. Fear, not for himself. For her. "We'll fix this," he said. "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." September 10th, 1953. 6 days later. The story broke on a Thursday. Walter Winchell, the most powerful gossip columnist in America, a man whose radio show reached 50 million people every Sunday night, opened his broadcast with 8 words. What leading television actress is a dedicated communist? He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. By Friday morning, every newspaper in Los Angeles had reporters camped outside the Desilu lot. By Friday afternoon, CBS executives were in emergency meetings. By Friday evening, Philip Morris I Love Lucy's primary sponsor was threatening to pull funding, and Lucille Ball sat in her dressing room, staring at a wall, while the world decided whether she was a traitor. September 11th, 1953. Emergency press conference, Desilu Studios. Desilu scheduled the press conference for 2 p.m. He didn't ask Lucille if she wanted to speak. He didn't ask CBS for permission. He just called every reporter in Hollywood and told them to show up or miss the story of the year. 93 journalists packed into Desilu's largest soundstage, the same stage where I Love Lucy filmed every week, now transformed into a war room. Folding chairs in rows, a microphone stand at the front, Klieg lights pointed at a small podium that looked like it had been borrowed from a high school auditorium. The room smelled like sweat and flashbulbs, and the particular anxiety of people who knew they were witnessing something historic, but weren't sure yet if it was a triumph or a disaster. Lucille sat in the front row, not at the podium, not speaking, just present. She wore a navy suit, tailored, professional, the kind of outfit a woman wore to a funeral or a trial. Her hair was pulled back, no Lucy Ricardo curls, no red lipstick, just her face, pale and composed, hands folded in her lap. Desilu stood at the podium. He was wearing a guayabera, cream-colored, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his face was set in an expression Lucille had only seen a handful of times in their 15 years together. Absolute fury, held perfectly still. "Good afternoon," he said. His accent was thick, deliberately so. He let every consonant land hard, let the rhythm bounce in that particular way that made him sound more Cuban than he usually did on camera, and Lucille knew immediately what he was doing. He was reminding them, "I'm an immigrant. I came here with nothing, and I built this. You want to talk about un-American? Let's talk about what America actually means. I'm here," Desi continued, "to address the rumors about my wife." He paused. Let the word wife hang in the air. Not business partner, not co-star, wife. Lucille Ball, he said, registered to vote as a communist in 1936. This is true. She did this because her grandfather, a man who raised her, who she loved, asked her to. She was 25 years old. She wanted to make him happy. So she signed a card. Another pause. She never attended a meeting. She never joined an organization. She never did one single thing to support communism. Not then. Not now. Not ever. A reporter in the third row raised his hand. "Mr. Arnaz, if she—" "I'm not finished," Desi said. The reporter sat down. Desi leaned into the microphone. I want to make something very clear, he said, his voice dropping lower, slower, each word deliberate. The only thing red about Lucy is her hair. He paused. And even that's not real. For one horrible second, the room was silent. Then someone laughed. A nervous, uncertain sound, but a laugh. And then another. And then the room erupted. Not mockery, relief. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight, and suddenly the reporters were grinning, scribbling notes, some of them shaking their heads in that particular way people do when they realize they've been sold a scandal that doesn't actually exist. Desilu stepped back from the microphone. Lucille stood. She walked to the podium. Every camera in the room turned toward her. She looked out at the faces. Reporters she recognized, some she didn't. All of them waiting to see if she would cry, if she would apologize, if she would crumble under the weight of America's suspicion. She didn't. I did register communist in 1936, she said. Her voice was calm, clear. My grandfather asked me to. I loved my grandfather. So I did it. That's the whole story. She paused. I am not a communist. I have never been a communist. I don't know what communists believe, and I don't care. What I care about is making a television show that makes people laugh. And if you think signing a piece of paper 17 years ago makes me a threat to this country, then you don't understand what kind of country this is supposed to be. She stepped back. The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't suspicion. It was something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition. September 14th, 1953, Monday night, 9 p.m. EST. I Love Lucy aired as scheduled. 44 million people tuned in. The episode was The Girls Go Into Business. Lucy and Ethel buy a dress shop. Chaos ensues. Everything falls apart in the most spectacular way possible. America laughed, not because they'd forgotten, but because they decided it didn't matter. The next day, Philip Morris released a statement. We stand by Lucy. CBS followed. Miss Ball has our full support. By the end of the week, the scandal was over. Not because Lucille had apologized, but because America had decided she didn't need to. September 15, 1953, 11:30 p.m., Lucille's home, Chatsworth. The house was quiet. Desilu was asleep upstairs. Little Lucy, 18 months old, was in her crib, breathing soft and even through the baby monitor on the nightstand. Lucille sat in the living room, alone, holding the photocopy of the registration card. She'd asked the FBI for it back. They'd refused, but she'd made her own copy before handing over the original, and now she sat with it in her lap, staring at her 25-year-old signature. The handwriting looked young, optimistic almost. The loops of the L in Lucille were too big. The tail of the ball swooped upward like it was trying to fly. She didn't write like that anymore. Now her signature was efficient, practiced. The signature of a woman who signed contracts and checks and autographs for fans who lined up outside the studio every week. But this signature, this one, belonged to a girl who'd thought signing a card for her grandfather was harmless. Who'd thought the past stayed in the past. Who hadn't known yet that everything you do, everything you sign, everything you say in a moment of love or exhaustion or just trying to make someone happy, all of it could come back. All of it could be used against you. She folded the photocopy in half, then in half again, then again until it was a small, thick square that fit in the palm of her hand. She walked to the fireplace. There were no logs. It was September in California, too warm for fires. But she knelt anyway, struck a match, and held the corner of the folded paper to the flame. It caught slowly. The paper was too thick to burn fast. It smoldered first, edges curling black, and she had to hold it longer than she wanted, the heat creeping toward her fingers until finally the whole thing was ash. She watched it fall into the grate. Gray dust. Nothing. She stood, walked to the kitchen sink, washed her hands. The water was cold. She let it run over her fingers until they were numb. When she looked up, her reflection stared back from the window above the sink, just a ghost image, backlit by the kitchen light, her face half in shadow. She looked tired. She looked 42. She looked like a woman who just survived something that should have killed her career but didn't. And she didn't know if that made her lucky or just postponed. Later that night, bed. Desilu purred over, half awake. You okay? He mumbled. Lucille lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Yeah? She said. You sure? She thought about it. No, she said finally. But I will be. Des's hand found hers under the covers. Squeezed once. You were great today, he said. I didn't do anything. Exactly. She turned her head to look at him. His eyes were closed, his breathing already slowing back towards sleep. But his hand stayed in hers. And for the first time in a week, she felt the tightness in her chest loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. Enough to breathe. 36 years later, Lucille Ball sat in a television studio, not Desilu, which she'd sold years ago, but a generic studio in Burbank where they were filming testimonials for a documentary about the Hollywood blacklist. She was 78 years old. Her hair was still red, bright, defiant, more wig than natural now, but red nonetheless. The interviewer was young, earnest, probably born after the McCarthy era ended. Miss Ball, he said, when you were accused of being a communist in 1953, did you ever think about just apologizing, even if you hadn't done anything wrong? Lucille looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. Why not? Because I didn't do anything wrong. But wouldn't it have been easier? She smiled. Not the Lucy Ricardo smile. Something smaller, sadder, real. Easier for who? She said. For the people accusing me? Sure. They would have loved that. But what about the next person? And the person after that? If I apologize for something I didn't do, I would have been telling every woman in America, when they come for you, just say you're sorry, even if you're not. She paused. I wasn't going to do that. The interviewer nodded, writing something in his notes. Do you think, he asked, that what happened to you changed anything? Lucille thought about it. I don't know, she said finally. But I know this. I didn't disappear. They wanted me to. They tried. But I didn't. She leaned back in her chair. And maybe that's enough. Those of us who were there, we remember the morning the FBI came to the studio. We remember Desi at the podium, turning a scandal into a punchline. We remember Lucille standing silent in front of 93 reporters, refusing to apologize for something she barely remembered doing. And we remember what she said years later when someone asked if she'd been afraid. Terrified. Every single day. But fear doesn't mean you stop. It just means you do it scared. Not just in Hollywood. Everywhere.